Hello and welcome back to the channel. And this week we're going to do something a little bit more interesting. I was watching the Professional Triathletes Organization Championship in Daytona on the weekend, and I have to say this race was really impressive. We had some of the top triathletes in the world just having an absolute drag race on this perfect venue in Daytona. I was actually supposed to race in Daytona this year myself, and it was cancelled with COVID, which was a little bit disappointing because this venue is just absolutely perfect for a drag race. It was a fantastic opportunity for everyone to lay their stamp on their chosen discipline. Fast swimmers were able to set fast swim times, the bikers enjoyed a wide open course where they could really lay down power, and then the runners could have a complete drag race on a flat course to the finish. Something I noticed was that some of the really high profile athletes were pulling up with cramp and injury, and it was something I was a little bit surprised to see, because this is typically what we would see with amateur athletes and what your average person would worry about going into triathlon. But here we have some of the most conditioned, best trained athletes in the world experiencing the same problems, and it was a little bit strange because most of them, this distance is well within their capability, and it's actually probably shorter than what some of them are used to doing. This video is going to be an analysis of the race, but also more an assessment of why we might get breakdown in a race, why we might pull up with cramp or injury. And I don't want to be too critical of any of the athletes. These are my own observations, but I really hope to try and take something positive away from it, maybe learn a little bit as to why these sorts of things might happen, and later we can go into ways why you can avoid it or try and prevent it in your training. I'd like to thank the Professional Triathlete Organization. They did a great job in providing a live stream free so that we could watch this amazing race, and I have to say it was really good to have that footage and such high quality footage, and they've actually allowed me to use some of that footage for this video, so it's great to have the resource there that we can look on real world examples, and I hope we continue to see more races like that. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, like, and if you have any comments, just leave them in the box below. And yeah, let's get into it. I have done my best to fact check and make sure that I'm not calling out or picking on any athlete who may have taken an injury into the race, because this does happen, and I think a lot of people with a race like this, they just want to race, and they're hoping that the injury might have recovered well enough for them to put in a good race result. And for some of them, this wasn't to be. So we saw a number of the athletes pulling up with cramp. And if we push through a cramp, we're generally going to cause a mild tear or strain in the muscle. And after the race, a lot of the athletes, when they're being interviewed, this is exactly what they said happened. They felt a bit of a cramp or they felt a little bit of a pull. And that's generally them pushing through cramp, which is usually a product of some form of breakdown or stress in the muscle. Cramp is actually a defense mechanism, so that when the muscle is starting to experience so much stress and it's actually causing damage to itself, it will put the handbrake on and tell you, I've had enough of this, by causing a cramp. This race was a little bit of a perfect storm for some of the issues that we saw with cramp and injury. Firstly, there was a big prize winning. So if you won the race, you earned a lot of money. There was money on the line, it made it a lot more competitive. Secondly, the course didn't really provide a huge amount of opportunities for overtaking through any sort of course characteristics. There wasn't hills you could catch people on. You basically had to be fast to pull away, and if somebody left you behind, you had to catch up with them, and it was pure speed. So this meant that a lot of the athletes had to work right at their limit and right at the limit of their speed. And for some of them, this meant that they were consuming massive amounts of energy, probably a lot more so than they would have liked. And with this, they had to consume just as much energy to keep them going, which when you're running at a very fast pace is not easy to do. When you're working at extremely high intensity, you burn a lot of glucose, and this produces lactate. When lactate accumulates, it starts shutting down the muscles and acts as a handbrake to really slow them down. It interferes with contraction. And in order for us to go faster, we've actually got to push the muscles even harder and put them under more strain. So if we're not getting enough calories on board, and we're also pushing the muscles, it's not so hard to understand why they started to break down and start to cramp up and then lead to some muscle tears and strains. So it's hard to comprehend just how much energy you burn, and especially when you're putting out these sort of power outputs. I mean, this guy's absolutely charging on the bike, and unless he's taking in huge amounts of energy, this is really going to cost him on the run, because he's just going to have nothing left in the tank when he gets there. The ITU athletes will actually benefit from a really active or developed glycolytic system, because they're running shorter races at really high intensity. And so this means that they just favor carbohydrate as a fuel. But in a race like this, they're going to be burning a huge amount of calories, but they're also going to have to take those calories in. Whereas a long course athlete may be able to spend a little bit more time on becoming fat adapted, or a little bit higher oxidative capacity, which means he's going to be able to spare a little bit of glycogen or carbohydrate. And this just takes a little bit of pressure off the amount of calories he needs to take in via sugar or carbohydrate. And this can be the difference when it comes to a longer race where the pace is high. Pace was so high, a lot of athletes actually missed the aid stations or didn't stop at the aid stations. And this isn't necessarily poor management, it was just a case of the race was so fast, seconds lost at an aid station may have cost them their positioning. In addition, some of them were actually going so fast that it made it very hard for them to actually collect a bottle. And we can see this with Magnus Ditlev when he was going past the aid station at 48 odd kilometers an hour. I mean, it's pretty hard to grab a bottle in that scenario.
He had a hard time getting water on the bike.
Yeah.
Kevin.
So Magnus Ditlev looks like he is cramping big time, and yeah, we watched him a few times trying to go by and get water out on that bike course, and he was just going so fast that I'm wondering if that is starting to come back to haunt him a little bit. And it looks like he's going to grab some gels and some nutrition now and hopefully be able to stretch his way out. He's still in a great position.
So here we have ITU athlete Lucy Hall, who set a fantastic split in the swim and then did really well to keep up on the bike, and she just can't get energy into herself quick enough here. And when you're that glycolytic and you're pushing that high a pace, it's extraordinarily hard to take on enough calories during a race to meet the demands. She was clearly aware of the amount of energy she was going to need with the amount of gel she took with her on the run. So we're here, we have seasoned veteran Tim O'Donnell, and you know, he knows he needs to take in as much energy as he can across the bike to, you know, have the energy there to really put out a good performance on the run. And this is just where experience shows where the priorities need to go. So here's a really good example where we have George Goodwin coming in towards the finish. He's maybe only got a kilometre or two to go. He doesn't need a gel to finish. He could walk to the finish from here, but he's still taking one. And the reason is because just even rinsing the mouth with carbohydrate, because he actually ends up spitting a lot of the gel out, is going to trick his sensors into saying, you know, sustained intensity fuel is on the way. And that's enough just to override those handbrake, you know, self-protective mechanisms in the muscle that cause cramp and cause people to slow down and lose intensity.
Maybe even negative split. Do you think your experience as a long course athlete paid off today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was running with a couple of the ITU guys and they were skipping the aid stations. I'm like, what's going on, guys? We got a long run. And so like I was running with Louis for a bit and he would pull away at the aid stations and I would catch back up. And yeah, I mean, just, I had a few hints of a cramp at about the halfway point on the run, but I was able to get rid of them.
Awesome.
Yeah, got some calories in, took a first endurance gel, and was able to make it to the finish.
Over time, if we've been racing at an intensity that's higher than what we're used to or higher than we're capable of, the body will start to break down. And in shorter races, sometimes we can get away with this because we get to the finish line before we actually start to feel the effects. But in a longer race like this one, if we're racing at a slightly higher intensity than we've trained for or than we're actually capable of, which is very easy to do once you get caught up in the moment and you've got the opportunity to win. But if we do that, the chances are something's got to give. And this will come in the form of muscle strain. The muscles will take the strain of this effort and they'll tear or cramp. The second reason for such in-race breakdown is mechanical stress. And most of these athletes will have prepared by doing long mileage in the winter and building up their support structures, the muscles, the ligaments, and the actual infrastructure that carries them. But it can be very, very difficult, especially in a season like this one, to get that same race intensity in training. Now, they're obviously going to be working at high intensity, but we know for a fact that when you get into racing, you know, anything goes. And you can see this even by Alistair Brownlee. He cramped up, he stopped, he tried to stretch. If this happened in training, that would be the end of his training session, but he did actually attempt to run on because he wants to race, he wants to win the race. So mechanical stress is something that is much, much higher in a race environment because you're trying to go literally as hard as you can. So that's my observation on that race and some of the reasons why I think so many high profile athletes had issues and pulled up. It wasn't necessarily that they were untrained or unconditioned. I think this race was just such a high intensity and it was so close. Many of them really pushed themselves to the red line. And as you can see, even the elite, they do have a limit. And once you go into that red line, you are running a risk of breakdown. And for most of us, this happens at a lower level, at a slower intensity or a slower race speed. But it still happens to the very, very best. And it's not necessarily a mistake on their part. It is more, in my opinion, just a product of a really intense, tight race where, you know, they're really putting their bodies on the line to try and get the result they're looking for. I hope you enjoyed that video. It was certainly something interesting to have a look at. And next week, I'm actually going to go through some training methods to help build a bit of durability and robustness in the legs so that you're a little bit more fatigue resistant and able to absorb a little bit more stress, so that whether your race is long or intense, you just have a little bit more resilience to fatigue and injury, and hopefully that'll help you complete the race and get the result you want. So please make sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss that video. Until next week, keep training and I'll see you then.